Hi there and welcome back to the Programming and Coding Basics with VBA, Python and Java with JavaScript, brought to you by QuadRoot R&D. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell icon for updates on future videos for this introductory course, intermediate and advanced topics in programming, data science, engineering, and more. In the last video, we went through the intelligent statements in programming and coding, the control flow or conditional statements in the form of repetitive loops and selective branches. And with that knowledge, you can pretty much write semi-intelligent programs if you have the right algorithm. Operations and conditionals form the basic building blocks of more complex programs and functions. In this video, we will discuss about functions, which are basically mini programs that make life easier for you as a programmer. You can write or define your own functions using the basic building blocks, or take advantage of the built-in functions available in a programming language. So starting with user-defined functions. A function is a mini program to do a specific thing using the concepts learned so far, i.e. the basic building blocks like loops and branches and operations. It's used whenever we want to reuse bits of code to do the same thing. If you're going to do something more than once at a different point of code, write a function. That's the thumb rule. You can do the same task but with different values by using variables and passing arguments in the parentheses next to the function name. i.e., you can push input data into a function, which is also known as passing arguments. Now, do you know why the parentheses are there when you start a function name? So this is why they're there, to pass input data into a function, to communicate with a function. You only run when we specifically call a function, else it will be ignored during the run. So you can have a program, the main program, and you can have a function below that or above that depending on the program language. But it will not execute a function if it's not called. So if it sees a function, it skips that. But if in the main program you call the function, then only it will run the function. So you can have functions in your program that never do anything if it's not called. So a function may return an output result. So you remember we use the brackets next to when we call the function, we say def something something in parentheses where we put the inputs. But a function may return an output result. And in Java, when no return value is there, we use the void before the function. And now do you recognize the word void? So the void we saw before the main method. Now methods are essentially functions, but that's what it's called in Java or in object-oriented programming in general. So when you say void, it means you don't expect an output from the function. The function is merely doing something and it does not return an output, but it does do something. So it requires inputs, maybe it doesn't require inputs, but it will do something. So if you don't expect outputs, then you use a void. If you do expect outputs, then you use a return. So in the example, private static void function name xy. Now xy are the inputs to the function. Void is saying that we are not expecting an output. But if you omit the word void and if you replace it with return, well, you don't have to even use the word return. If the void is not there, then it expects a return. So this is the syntax for a function in the form of examples. Now this is basically a check val function. Basically, all this time when I've shown you examples, I have expected the user to input the right values. But what if the user put in wrong values or unexpected values, GIGO errors, garbage in, garbage out? Or what if the user is malicious and is trying to hack into something? So you usually, once you have an input to your program, you also have to check that input, put some fail-safe to that, and you can use it in the form of a function. Usually it's called input validation, where you validate the input. You usually have an input validation function. So I've given you a simple example. Suppose you're expecting a number between a certain range. So you have a minimum value and you have a maximum value. So to pass the inputs into that function, you have to tell the function, well, first, this is the value that I've got from the user. This is the min value I'm expecting, and that's this, and then I'm expecting a max value. So the value that the user has input has to be between the min value and the max value. And so in VBA, we say check val, the value, which is, these are variable names. So the value is the value input by the user, min val is the minimum value that you expect, and max v is the maximum value you expect. So we say if val less than min v or val greater than max v, then message box input invalid. Or you could have something, you could just exit the program saying invalid inputs, please start again, or please re-enter, whatever. But basically it's checking, and if it's not within those limits, then it returns a input invalid or something like that. So in the main program, you would call this function just by simply writing checkval, which is the function name. And in the parentheses, we pass the arguments, which is x is the value that the variable in which the user has input, 1 is your minimum value, and 10 is your maximum value. In Python, it's def checkval, val min v max v. If val meant less than min v or val greater than max v, print input invalid. And the same usage pretty much in Python. And the same in Java. Note the OR condition here. And private static return. So this says that we're expecting a return. So check val min v max v. Now take another example. Suppose you want to find the maximum value inside an array. And say your array, you have 10 elements. So how would you write that function? You'd probably, as a starting point, you would say write a loop through each elements of the array and check if the first element is less than the second element, or vice versa. If the second element is greater than the first element, then store the second element into the max value. And if the third element is greater than the second element, then store the third. Else continue till the end. And whatever is stored in the max variable, that would be your maximum value. Now that's not the most efficient algorithm. There are other algorithms out there. But the point of this is that you don't have to write that function because it's already written for you. Now many programs already have built-in functions. And there are a few common built-in functions across programs or methods. And max is one of them. And it already uses a more efficient algorithm than what we just spoke about, using the divide and conquer method. So these are some of the common built-in functions and methods. I'm not going to go through them in detail. And as you know, you can come back to this video, you can screenshot this, or you can click on the link to the cheat sheet in the description, which contains all the commands that are discussed in this course, which you can copy and paste from. So I will not go into the syntax in detail. And by now you are probably familiar with the syntax and the differences between VBA, Python, and Java. But what I want to focus on is what's possible. And once you know what's possible, then you can get an idea of how you want to go about doing things. So I'll probably discuss just a few commands, just to show the complexity of some commands. But mainly, I just want you to get an idea of what's possible. Now, I've listed over here 3 kinds or 4 kinds of functions. The one set of functions have to do with the date. And the next set of functions have to do with the value. And then the third set of the functions are to do with numerals. And the fourth set are to do with string. These are called string functions. So you have string functions, numerical functions, value functions, and date functions. Of course, there are other functions, but these are the most common ones and the most useful ones, rather. Now, a lot of the times we need access to the current date, the current time, and that helps us, say, if you want to search for certain data in the last 6 months. So you need first to know the current time and then minus 6 months and then perform a search or something like that. So that's why it's useful to have the date. So you can store the date functions into a variable. Now, for example, in VBA, the built-in function is date. So you can store that value into X. And in VBA, it actually outputs the days since the 1st Jan of 1900. So this is called the Julian date. And today would probably be something like 46430, something like 46,000. So that's how many days have passed since 1st Jan 1900. In Python, it's from datetime, import datetime. So basically this library, and what I've not mentioned before explicitly is a library is a built-in collection of functions. So each programming language has a library, which is basically a collection of functions, built-in functions. So you have to tell, sometimes some functions are readily available. Other functions you have to first import the library in which it resides in. And Python has a lot of libraries which are written by the community. So the date lies in the datetime library. So you say from datetime, which is the library name, import datetime, which is the function name. So this is a weird one where the function name and the library name is the same. And then you say time is equal to, you put time into X. So this is for both the date and the time. It's in the form of time. And this stores the seconds since 1st Jan 1970, which is probably like the beginning of computers, the early days of computers. So time 0 for computers. And in JavaScript, you can store the date without the time in using new date. And you can store the time. Well, first you store the new date into D. Now this contains the date and time. And then you can get the time out of this by using d.getTime. So .getTime is a method. And this stores the milliseconds since 1970. So this is going to be a huge number in the order of billions or millions or something like that. So yeah, so this is how you do it. You first import the new date and then you .getTime it to get the time. Whereas in VBA, it's just time. And in VBA, it's in HHMMSS, which is a string. It's not a number. In Python, time is just time in brackets, provided you have imported the datetime. And then VBA, you can combine date and time as now. So this gives only the date in terms of days, time only the time as a string, and now gives the date and time, pretty much like time in Python and new date in Java. So this new date and time and now are probably equivalent between the languages. So this is a bit confusing, I know, but it takes a bit of time to get used to the way dates and times are stored as functions in the 3 languages. So you can get the weekday using the date. So you can get the weekday out of the date. So these are 2 functions used in combined. Or you can get the day. So the weekday will be the actual day in like Sunday, where 0 is Sunday. So it'll be a number from 0 to 6, where 6 is Saturday and 0 is Sunday. And 1 is Monday. Or you can get the day, which is like 24. Of that date. You can get the month, 09, or you can get the year, 2020. Pretty much the same here using the d dot methods, where d is storing the date time in this format, and this is pretty much standard. And from this D you can get out the weekday, the day, the month, the year. Similarly, if D is equal to new date in Java, you can get the day, date, month, and full year. Now moving on to value functions, you can test if a variable is empty or is null. Now if you remember, if you don't initialize a variable, then it is null and may cause issues. So null value can also happen when you have invalid data. For example, if you're expecting a number, if you've dimensioned your variable as an integer or a float, but you get a string instead, then the data is invalid. So if you want to check if the data is invalid during debugging, or maybe during your main program also, if you need to check by chance if the user's input wrong data, instead of a number he's put a string, then you can use the isNaN or is not a number for the variable. Now isNaN is available in the library math. So you import math in the Python library and you check for isNaN. It's similar in Java, isNaN with a capital NaN. You can also check if it's numeric using isNumeric in VBA, but there's no equivalent in Python that I found, and isFinite in Java. Now coming to other numerical functions, you can get the absolute value of a variable. If a variable is negative, you can get the positive value out of that using ABS. Same in Python, and in Java when you call the math library using math with the capital M dot ABS. Summation, you use the sum. You can sum a whole lot of values in this. In Python, you have to write your own user-defined function. There are some libraries that may have this. In Java, it's math.sum. You can round numbers where x is the main variable, y is the number of decimal places. In Python, the same way, y can be negative for 0 points for numbers. So you can, where x is the main number and y is the number of decimal places. Now you can have negative decimal places, wherein suppose you have 5432. So if x is equal to 5432 and you have say -3, then it will round that as 5000. So you can have like the last 2 digits before the decimal places as 00, or last 3 digits as 00. Or if you have like -2, then 5430 will then round down to 5400. In Java, it's to fixed method where y is the decimal places. You can round up, you can round down. In Python, it's called ceiling and trunc, but this is not to decimal places. This is to whole numbers, integers. So you can round up to the nearest integer, or you can round down by truncating to the nearest integer. So if it's 5.432, then that ceiling will be 6 and trunc will be 5. Same for Java and JavaScript. But for VBA, you can round up to a certain decimal place. So 5.432 rounded to first decimal is 5.5 and 5.4. Then you can generate random numbers. Now we saw this in the example program for guess the number. In VBA, it generates a random number between 0 and 1. And then you can use that to generate a higher random number, or you can use the rand between. So you can use a rand between 1 and 100 and it'll generate an integer between 1 and 100. From In Python, you can use the random library. So from random, import randint, which is a random integer. And then you can say randint between the numbers you desire and store it in a variable. And in Java, you can use the math random. Again, like in VBA, it generates a number between 0 and 1, random number between 0 and 1. So if it's say 0.43, then you can use that 0.43 here, say that is the first guess, into 100. So if you want to generate a number between 1 and 100, so 0.43 into 100 is 43 plus 1, 44, and then you floor it, which will be 44. So if it was 432, then it would be 43.2, 44.2, floor it to 44. And so that's how you get 44. Then you can convert a string to a number if it looks like a number but somehow it's a string. You can then force it to a number using the value in VBA, or eval in Python, or pass float in Java for floats, and pass in for integers. You can count the number of elements in an array using count. You can, in Python, it's x.count method. You can even count the number of A's in a variable or in an array, or anything, whatever string you want, you can count that. So in America, how many A's? You can count that. There it'll find 2 A's. You can find the length of an array using the x.length, which is similar to count. So you can count the elements of an array using the dot length. If you want to find so that was count in an array, but if you want to find the length of a string, then you can use the len command in VBA, and in Python the same. In Java it's x.length. Then there are left, right, and middle of a string. If you want the left 3 characters or x characters, and the right n characters, or you want some middle characters. In VBA you use left, right, and mid. So in left you specify the number of characters after the variable. So I want the first 3 of the in variable x. So if x is equal to America, then this will be AME, and right would be ICA, the last 3 characters. Or if I want, say, starting the middle characters, which is starting the 3 characters from the second. So starting from the second, take 3 characters. So that you specify as the starting point, and then how many characters. So in America, they would starting from the second, which would be M. So MER would be the middle 3 characters starting from second. Now in Python, you use array methods. You have to keep in mind that elements start with 0. So these are essentially array methods wherein you specify if you say the string as an array. So you convert the string as an array using these square brackets. So if you want the left 3 characters of the array, then you use :3. But if you want the right, then you put the number on the left of the colon and you put a negative sign. So you are counting from the right, -3. Now, if you want the middle characters, you starting from the second. Now, the second is actually at index 1. So we say index 1, 2, 4. So basically, we're saying start at 1 and end at 4. Over here, we're saying start at -3 and go till the end. And here, we're saying start from the start and end at third character. Exclude the third character. We just want 0, 1, and 2. So this is using array methods. So I've explained here what start is, where starting position 2 minus 1, 1, and the end is 2 plus 3 minus 1, which is 4. In JavaScript, we use the substring method. So substring 0, 1, and 2. Again, it's an array method. If you want the right characters, we combine substring and length, and you have to use your brains how you would do that. And for the middle characters, again, starting character and ending character. Index. Starting index and ending index. Now, if you want to change the case of a string, you use lowercase to convert all to lowercase, or uppercase to convert all to uppercase. So in VBA, it's L case and U case. In Python, it's x.lower and x.upper. And in Java and JavaScript, it's x dot to lowercase and x dot to uppercase. And this is useful when you may expect users to sometimes give lowercase, sometimes give uppercase, so then you can just always convert to uppercase. So this is very useful then. So always I use the uppercase, and so everything I convert to uppercase, and then there's no case sensitive issues in your program. If you want to find a particular character, then you can use the find. So you can find the first A in a variable in an array X using the instring command in VBA, or x.find in Python, or x.index, or in Java, x.search. And if you want to replace, you can use replace in VBA with what you want to replace and what you want to replace it with, or you can use x.replace in Python, what you want to replace, what you replace with, or x.replace in Java, what you want to replace and what you replace with in Java and JavaScript. So there are other functions, obviously. For example, Python has some more useful functions like sorted, string, list, tuple, slice, all, any, and I've not covered them here. I've put the link to the full Python list of functions, built-in functions and methods in the description. So check that out. It's not too many in Python. So you can have a read through that and understand what those functions are all about. So with that, we've pretty much finished programming and coding. And we've just finished 2 hours. So I could have titled my course even more clickbaity, Learn Programming in 2 hours. But wait, we haven't actually done any coding for ourselves. So let's get to that in the next video. First, we'll look at a code walkthrough of the example of the game Mastermind, which will use all that we've learned so far. And then we will go on to install the IDEs where we will code in part 3, which is the hands-on, and then get coding ourselves. So I'll see you in the next video where we go through the Mastermind game. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you in the next class.